Well, hello and welcome to session 13 of the 5-Minute Bible Guides. In session 11, we talked about a few of the key prophecies in the Bible and how they've been fulfilled. Now, session 12 was a video I made with 3 of my grandsons called Bible Fun Facts, and it was indeed a fun thing to video. In this session, we'll be taking a look at some of the different genres of literature or types of writing used in the Bible. We'll also discuss why knowing about these genres can help us both understand the Bible and gain a deeper appreciation for this beloved book. So, let's get right to what a genre is. In literature, a genre is a type of writing that follows a particular format and style. Poetry is a very different type of writing than, for example, a historical record. Both of these genres are different than riddles or allegories or even the words to a song. So it's important that readers of the Bible know which genre they're dealing with in order to correctly understand the message that it's trying to communicate. So, what types of literary genres might a person encounter in the Bible? A short list will include things like law, historical narrative, wisdom literature, poetry, musical lyrics, prophecy, epistles, and apocalypse. So let's take a closer look at each of these literary genres of the Bible. We'll start with law. The main law section of the Bible is the books from Genesis through Deuteronomy. Although these books also contain other genres such as historical narrative, the specific law portions would include the 10 Commandments, as well as many other commands and ordinances of God's covenant with Israel, 613 of them in all, by the way. The law sections primarily communicate God's holy character and how Israel was to uphold God's holiness in their worship and reflect righteousness in their everyday lives. A parallel in the New Testament Gospels would be the Beatitudes of Matthew chapter 5. The historical narrative genre is found in many books of both Old and New Testaments. Examples from the Old Testament can be found in the long and interesting story of Israel's slavery and flight to freedom in the book of Exodus. Others include the story of David and Goliath in 1 Samuel and Nehemiah's account of how the Jews rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem in 52 days. In the New Testament, the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, relate the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. The book of Acts gives us a focused account of the growth and spread of the Christian church from Jerusalem to Rome in its earliest days. And as a part of this historical narrative genre, you'll encounter meticulous records that are important for the story, such as lists of kings, numbers of men from the tribes of Israel counted for various reasons, and genealogical lines of descent that prove a particular person's heritage. For instance, the long and seemingly boring lists of fathers and sons in the early chapters of Matthew and Luke are there to prove that Jesus is of the correct family line from which Messiah was prophesied to come. Well, like narrative, wisdom literature is scattered throughout the Bible. Proverbs is a collection of wise sayings meant to guide people through the tough moral decisions and life issues that we all face. It speaks to things like honesty, fair treatment of people, hard work, sexual morality, and just paying attention to what makes for a successful life. And speaking of a successful life, how would a person know how to live one? Ecclesiastes explores the various paths to successful living that people of all times and cultures have tried. It concludes that since life is mysterious and very short, the best way to live is to honor God and enjoy His blessings. Job tackles the difficult issue of suffering, whether it's always deserved, whether it's got any purpose, and how to survive it. And by the way, Job is also written in poetic form. In the New Testament, the book of James focuses on wise living for people who follow Christ in a hostile society. Let's talk about poetry. I mentioned Job, but all of the Psalms and numerous sections of other books in the Old Testament are written as poetry. As you learned in school, poetry harnesses the use of vivid and figurative language to make powerful points that are easily understood and even memorized. For example, Psalm 42:1 describes the writer's desperate search for God when it says, "As the deer pants for streams of water, so my soul pants for you, my God." While not as common in the New Testament, there are poetic passages there too. 1 Timothy 3:16 may be an example. God appeared in the flesh, was vindicated by the Spirit, was seen by angels, was preached among the nations, was believed on in the world, was taken up in glory. That's poetry. Let's look at some musical lyrics. Psalms are actually in two of these genre categories because not only are they poetic, but they're what's left of ancient Israel's hymn book. They were originally accompanied by the music of harps, trumpets, cymbals, drums, etc. But unfortunately, musical notation wasn't invented until centuries after the Bible was written. So when the Jews were scattered and dispersed by the Romans after 70 AD, the music itself was forgotten. You could get an idea of what the music of the Psalms may have sounded like by listening to traditional Jewish folk music preserved by Jewish people today. When it comes to musical lyrics, I can't forget Song of Solomon in the Old Testament. In Roman Catholic Bibles, this book's called Canticles. I like to describe Song of Solomon as the very first opera ever written. It features a love story sung by the two main characters, Solomon and his bride. And there's also a chorus that sort of ties the parts of the two soloists together. And by the way, this book has portions that really should be rated with a great big R due to its very strong sexual references. The prophetic sections of the Old Testament are usually divided into major prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel, and the 12 minor prophets, that's Hosea through Malachi. The prophets speak to issues related to Israel fulfilling its covenant with God, both warning them and encouraging them during periods of spiritual and national crisis. Much of the prophetic writings deal with events and situations that Israel faced at particular times in their national life. Some portions within the writings of the prophets seem to predict future events or at least warn of future consequences if people continue in disobedience and injustice. Accounts of the words and doings of prophets within the early church also appear in the narrative portions of the New Testament. Well, turning to the epistles. An epistle is just an old-fashioned word for letter. The New Testament letters from Romans to Jude are instructions, guidance, and answers to individuals, groups, and churches. For example, the Apostle Paul wrote Romans as an explanation of the key elements of the Christian faith. 1 Corinthians was written to solve problems among the Christians in the city of Corinth. The letters to Timothy and Titus were sent to encourage and guide these younger church leaders who oversaw groups of Christians in very challenging times. Finally, there's Apocalypse. This genre appears in Old Testament books like Zechariah and Daniel. It features vivid images, symbolic language, and dire predictions of future world events. The entire book of Revelation is apocalyptic. In fact, the original Greek title of the book is Apocalypsis. Okay, that was longer than usual. I really do try to stick to the 5-minute length for these videos, but as you can see, there's a lot of different types of writing in the Bible. Knowing a bit about them is important because how you read each type or genre will be a bit different. The narrative parts are intended to be read as historically, literally true, much like you'd read any history book or historical novel. Poetry, well, that's different. I might say that my love is like a red, red rose, but would you take me 100% literally if I did that? You'd understand that I'm comparing the beauty of my wife with the beauty of a rose. You get the point. The maxims of Proverbs are similar to the maxims collected by, say, Benjamin Franklin in his Poor Richard's Almanac. You know, a penny saved is a penny earned, early to bed and early to rise makes you healthy, wealthy, and wise, etc. Each genre is intended to communicate truth in a particular way. So have at it. Pick up that Bible and read it for all it's worth. In the next session, we'll take a look into some of the Bible's main themes. Until then, this is Dr. Michael Bogart for the 5-Minute Guides to the Bible.